Hello, I'm Ellie O'Connell, and this presentation will examine the use of parallelism as a literary device in Roald Dahl's collection of short stories, The Great Automatic Grammatizator. Through this analysis, we will consider how using parallelism can modulate the meaning and tone of a text, and consequently both why and when an author may choose to use this technique. I will then provide examples of situations where parallelism can be an excellent literary tool to wield. Finally, we will look at an example of my own work whereby I have used parallelism in a couple of different ways to inject meaning into and affect the mood of the text. Right, let's get started. So what is parallelism? Generally speaking, parallelism describes the state of two or more things corresponding in some way. If we hone in specifically on parallelism's role in literary works, the resulting scope is still quite broad, as the parallel element can be grammatical structure, sound, meter, meaning, and theme, and so on. To ensure this presentation is both comprehensive and practical, we will focus on grammatical parallelism. Thus, for our purposes today, the definition of parallelism is the repetition of words, phrases, clauses, and sentences that have the same or similar grammatical structure. Specifically, we will consider structural parallelism, which is parallelism within sentences, and parallel sentences, which is parallelism of consecutive sentences. You are likely already somewhat familiar with parallelism, as it is often found in prose, poetry, rhetoric, lyrics, and nursery rhymes. One place it's frequently used is political speeches. Take the following example from Barack Obama's presidential inauguration speech. My fellow citizens, I stand here today humbled by the task before us, grateful for the trust you have bestowed, mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors. When read aloud, it is easy to hear the musical quality created by the repetition of verb-led phrases. It's a great example of the effect parallelism, which is often used to add balance, lyricism, and flow to a text for the purpose of increasing both the readability, or in this case, listenability, and potential persuasiveness of the words. Just before we get into a more in-depth examination of the technique, let's take a quick look at the basic info of the source text. The Great Automatic Grammatizator is a collection of 13 of Roald Dahl's short stories for adults, which are linked by the through lines of dark humour, deception, flawed and often unlikable characters, and unexpected plot twists. Dahl, who died in 1990, was a highly successful British novelist, short story writer, and poet, who is of course best known for his children's books. On this note, it's important to recognise the link between Dahl's success as a prolific children's author and his use of parallelism as a technique in the adult-targeted stories within the Great Automatic Grammatizator. Dahl uses many techniques in his children's literature that create an atmosphere of magic, mischief, whimsy, and fun. Many of these techniques, for example, the use of made-up words and the comical, personality-centric naming of characters, don't translate well into adult works, as they're too childish and too obvious. Parallelism is an exception to this rule, as it's a subtle way to inject musicality and a pleasant flow of ideas into a text without talking down to an adult audience. Thus, it's a technique that Dahl was able to successfully transplant from his children's books to his adult literature. Now, to delve a little deeper into the what and why of parallelism, let's take a look at some examples of structural parallelism, taken from various short stories within the Great Automatic Grammatizator, whereby words, phrases, or clauses that are grammatically the same or similar are repeated within a sentence. Example 1 is a list of 3 actions, each written as a parallel clause. Each clause begins with a past tense verb or verb phrase, seen in bold, followed by a pattern of noun phrase, in green, then prepositional phrase, underlined, which is slightly but inconsequentially different in the last clause. This instance of structural parallelism is used by Dahl to relay the actions of the character in an efficient and highly readable manner. The parallelism also lets the sentence flow in a way that mirrors the continuous activity of the character. Now, example 2 shows how Dahl uses structural parallelism to describe 3 characters in the same sentence. Each descriptive clause follows the pattern of a noun phrase, seen in bold, and consisting of 2 adjectives and the noun eyes, plus a prepositional phrase, seen underlined, and consisting of the preposition for plus a noun, which is the name of the character. The repetition of this structure creates a rhythm within the sentence, which is emphasized by the fact that each description has a similar number of syllables. This is most obvious when read aloud. 3 pairs of eyes, all different but equally mistrusting. Small pig eyes for Rummins, large slow eyes for Claude, and 2 odd eyes for Bert. We can clearly hear the musical quality of the description, which is created by the use of structural parallelism. In this way, the description stands out from the surrounding prose and is particularly memorable. It's because of this distinctive lyrical quality that parallelism is an excellent foregrounding tool. An example of parallelism being used to foreground is on the current slide, which shows the opening paragraphs of the story titled The Butler. In this extract, Dahl has used the repetition of noun phrases, beginning with no, as seen in bold, to draw attention to that particular section of text. This use of parallelism signposts that the dullness of the dinners is the major takeaway from the opening paragraphs. This proves to be true as the remainder of the story revolves around Cleaver's attempts to remedy this problem. Therefore, Dahl's use of parallelism as a foregrounding tool is a good indicator of how we too can use parallelism as a way to foreground information in our own work. Now, let's look at how Dahl uses parallel sentences. The first quote is a clear example of parallel sentences and how they bring a lyrical quality to a text. The first 2 sentences follow the pattern of verb in bold and then noun phrase in green. The next 3 sentences, which aren't true sentences but are punctuated as such, all consist of a single verb, thus creating a pattern of verb, verb, verb. Again, when read aloud, the patterns and the rhythm they create become particularly clear. Go somewhere warm, get some sunshine, swim, relax, sleep. Just like structural parallelism, parallel sentences can be used to foreground important information within a text. Dahl has done so in the second extract on the slide, which gives a description of a guest book found by the protagonist in The Landlady. The final 2 sentences are grammatically parallel. One was a Christopher Mulholland from Carp. The other was Gregory W. Temple from Bristol. These 2 characters are an integral part of the strange plot twist at the end of the story. Thus, we can see Dahl has again used parallelism, this time in the form of parallel sentences, to highlight the importance of this information and present it to the reader in a memorable fashion, so that it comes to them when the plot twist is eventually revealed. Now we've looked at some specific examples of how and why Dahl has used parallelism in the great automatic grammatizator. Let's consider why we, as writers, may choose to use parallelism in our own work. Parallelism is a useful addition to any writer's toolbox because it's a literary device that performs a number of different functions and thus can be used in a variety of ways. Parallelism increases readability by using word patterns readers can follow easily, creates flow and interconnectivity within sentences and paragraphs, brings balance to a sentence or sentences, by placing equal importance on all the elements, gives writing a lyrical, musical and rhythmic quality that makes it both easy to understand and remember, and also parallelism can place a level of grandiosity and importance on a particular piece of information due to the element of repetition that is inherent in both structural parallelism and parallel sentences. Considering all the ways parallelism can modulate the meaning, tone, and flow of a piece of text, it's evidently a useful tool for writers. With that in mind, let's look at some situations where we might want to use parallelism in our own writing. For each situation, we'll also look at a corresponding example of how to do so. The first reason we might use parallelism is to increase the readability of a section of text. A great way to do so is by using the editorial process to identify clunky, awkward sentences and then attempt to rewrite them using the rules of structural parallelism. This will enhance the natural flow of the text. As discussed earlier, another way to use parallelism is as a tool to foreground and emphasize a key bit of information. The lyrical quality of parallelism makes it stand out from ordinary prose, and consequently it's an ideal literary device to use for this purpose. For example, you could use 3 short parallel sentences to highlight a series of quick actions within an otherwise slow, detail-oriented scene. A third situation where parallelism comes in handy is when you're creating a persuasive piece of text. This is an excellent time to use parallel sentences to place emphasis on a particular idea, and if you combine this parallelism with partial phrase repetition, it sticks in the mind of the reader even more clearly. Fourthly, consider using parallelism when you want to create a musical and memorable description. Try writing a structurally parallel sentence when describing a group of characters or objects, and observe how the resulting rhythm and flow adds an extra element of magical surrealism to the description. The last situation that may call for an injection of parallelism occurs when a section of text needs to emphasize a theme or idea using the natural flow of the text to carry it through. When this is the case, try rewriting the entire paragraph with parallelism in mind and use both structural parallelism and parallel sentences to develop the prevalent idea. Now that we've looked at the what, why, and when of parallelism, we'll finish off by looking at an example of how I put the technique to use in my own writing. The extract here on the slide is a scene depicting a family dinner. The first section in bold is an example of structural parallelism, which I've used to give the description of the 3 daughters' fingernails a rhythmic sing-song quality. As the description is from the mother's perspective, its childlike feel is strange and slightly jarring, thus indicating all is not well with the mother. The second bolded section consists of 3 short parallel sentences. This example of parallelism emphasizes the strangeness of the mother's behavior and her corresponding irrational belief that she can mold her own face. I chose to use parallel sentences in this instance to highlight this behavior and cause readers to consider the root of the mother's perceived unhappiness and delusion. I also wanted to have it stick in the reader's mind as they continue to read the story so they can link it to other strange occurrences later on in the piece. Thus, in this extract, I believe I have successfully used both structural parallelism and parallel sentences to put the focus on the mother's strange behavior and what it may reveal about her mental state and the sinister family dynamic. In conclusion, this presentation has explained the literary device parallelism and analysed examples of it from Roald Dahl's The Great Automatic Grammatizator. We then considered the various reasons why we, as writers, may choose to use parallelism in our own work, identifying some specific situations where we could do so. Lastly, we looked at a piece of my own writing where I used parallelism to modulate the meaning and tone of the text. I hope you found this presentation helpful and will try using parallelism in your future authorial adventures. Thank you for your time.